We've all seen it. That now infamous clip of Gino Palazzolo, his face a mask of strained agony, complaining about buying his fiancée, Jasmine Pineda, $1 meal. We've heard him whine about the cost of paint, the price of an electric toothbrush, the expense of her very existence. He called her a gold digger, a user for wanting a nice dinner, for wanting to build a life. But recently discovered court documents and a series of secret leaked emails prove he didn't just promise her a life of luxury. He contractually bound himself to it and then orchestrated a cruel and deliberate scheme of financial abuse to keep her under his thumb. This isn't just a story about a cheap boyfriend. This is a story of calculated fraud. If you're tired of the carefully edited narratives and want the real, unfiltered story behind the camera, the one the network doesn't want you to see, then you've come to the right place. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and give this video a like, because the tell-all tapes is about to expose the biggest financial scandal in Fiancé history, and you will not want to miss a single shocking detail. For years, the public narrative surrounding Gino and Jasmine has been deceptively simple, a story as old as time. The older, unassuming American man and the fiery, demanding Latina. The producers of the show masterfully crafted this image, feeding us a steady diet of Jasmine's emotional outbursts, juxtaposed with Gino's penny-pinching habits. We were led to believe he was a frugal, perhaps even struggling, automotive engineer from Michigan, trying his best to satisfy a woman whose desires were simply beyond his means. Every fight about money was framed as a clash of cultures and expectations. Jasmine was portrayed as materialistic, ungrateful, and perpetually dissatisfied. Gino was the victim, the walking wallet, the man who just couldn't catch a break. We, the audience, were encouraged to take sides. Comment sections lit up with criticism of Jasmine. She's just using him for a green card. All she cares about is his money. Gino needs to run. This narrative was not an accident. It was a carefully constructed plotline designed for maximum drama and audience engagement. It relied on tired stereotypes and a surface-level understanding of their relationship. But what if that entire narrative was a lie? What if Gino's cheapness wasn't a personality quirk, but a calculated weapon? And what if Jasmine's demands weren't born from greed, but from the desperate cries of a woman trying to hold her partner accountable to a promise he had already made in writing? To understand the depth of the deception, we must first travel back in time, before the cameras, before the K visa, to the very beginning of their digital romance. This is where the foundation of the fraud was laid. Jasmine Pineda was not a destitute woman waiting for an American sun savior. Far from it. She was a highly respected, tenured literature teacher in Panama. She held multiple advanced degrees and was a published author. She had a career, a reputation, and, most importantly, financial independence. She lived a comfortable upper-middle-class life, funded by her own hard work and intellect. Her apartment was paid for, her bills were current, and she had the means to indulge in the personal care and procedures that Gino would later dangle over her head like a cruel puppeteer. Gino entered her life as a suitor who seemed to understand and appreciate her ambition. In the early days of their relationship, conducted entirely over video calls and text messages, he was relentlessly charming. He presented himself as a successful man, lonely, and looking for a true partner. But one major obstacle stood in the way of their burgeoning romance: time zones and Jasmine's demanding career. An insider source, close to Jasmine's legal team, revealed that Gino's frustration grew with each missed call and delayed text. He became obsessed with having unfettered access to her, complaining that her job, with its long hours and commitment to her students, was an intrusion on their time. He wanted her available / a digital companion ready to talk whenever he felt lonely or bored. This is where the story takes a dark and legally binding turn. We have exclusively obtained transcripts of the key emails that formed the basis of Jasmine's explosive lawsuit. In an email dated April 2 years before their first on-screen appearance, Gino laid out what her lawyers would later call the Golden Handcuffs contract. He wrote, and I quote directly from the court filing, "My dearest Jasmine, I cannot bear another day of these missed connections. Your job, as noble as it is a wall between us. I lie awake at night just wanting to hear your voice. I've been thinking long and hard about this, and I want to make you an offer, a promise from my heart. I am in a very good financial position. I have significant savings and a stable, high-paying job. If you quit your job, if you make the ultimate sacrifice for our love and make us your priority, I will provide for you completely. I will give you a monthly stipend of no less than US dollars. This will cover your rent, your personal expenses, your beauty treatments, your procedures, everything. You won't have to worry about a single thing, except loving me. Think of it, my love. A life with no financial stress, where all your energy can be focused on our future together. This is my solemn promise to you. Legal analyst Meredith Cates, who reviewed the case file for us, explains the gravity of this email. This is not just a lover's sweet nothing, Kate states. This is a classic unilateral contract offer. Gino, the offeror, made a clear and definite promise. He outlined specific terms: quit your job in exchange for $1 a month. Jasmine, the offeree, accepted this offer not with words but with action. The moment she submitted her letter of resignation to the Panamanian Ministry of Education, citing her intention to build a life with her American fiancé, she fulfilled her end of the bargain. Her resignation was the consideration. From that point forward, Gino's promise was no longer a romantic gesture, it was a legally enforceable debt. Jasmine, blinded by love and trusting the man she planned to marry, took the leap. She walked away from a decade-long career, from her pension, from her professional identity, and from her financial autonomy. She traded it all for a promise whispered through a screen from a man in Michigan. For the first 2 months, Gino upheld his end of the deal. The transfers for $4 arrived as promised. Jasmine settled into her new life, spending her days planning their future, talking to Gino for hours, and maintaining the lifestyle she was accustomed to. She had no reason to believe anything was amiss. But then, the manipulation began. In the 3rd month, only $1 arrived. When Jasmine questioned him, Gino was full of excuses. A sudden, unexpected car repair. A tax bill that was higher than he anticipated. He was apologetic, promising to make it up to her the following month. The next month, it was $, then it stabilized at a mere $1. Every time Jasmine raised concerns, Gino would turn it around on her. He would employ classic gaslighting techniques, making her feel greedy and ungrateful. "Don't you know how much things cost here?" he'd say. "I'm doing my best, Jasmine. It feels like you only care about money. Do you not love me for me?" This is the version of Gino we became familiar with on the show. The man who nickel and dimed her, who made her feel like a financial burden for wanting the life he had explicitly promised her. He had successfully reframed the narrative. He was no longer the one breaking a contract. She was the one with unreasonable demands. He had engineered a situation where she was completely dependent on him and then used that dependency to control her. She couldn't go back to her old job. She had given up her apartment based on their plans for her to move to the US. She was trapped, financially and emotionally. For years, Gino played this part to perfection, not just for Jasmine, but for the cameras and for the world. He complained about the cost of her visa application, the price of her apartment, the money for her hair and nails, all expenses that were supposed to be covered by the promised stipend. He made her beg for basic necessities, turning every financial transaction into a power play, a test of her loyalty. He was a master of what psychologists call financial gaslighting, making someone question their own perception of reality and their own worth by manipulating financial information. He made her believe his financial situation was precarious, that he was sacrificing everything for her, when in reality, he was hoarding his money and breaking a sacred promise. The emotional toll on Jasmine was immense, something the cameras only captured glimpses of. Her fiery outbursts, often edited to look like irrational tantrums, were, in fact, the desperate reactions of a woman being systematically stripped of her agency. She was an intelligent, accomplished professional who is now being treated like a child, forced to ask for an allowance from a man who is lying to her face every single day. She had given up her entire world for him, and in return he was deliberately keeping her in a state of financial precarity to ensure she could never leave. The deception might have continued indefinitely, a dirty little secret buried under the weight of reality TV drama. But Gino made one fatal error. He got arrogant. He needed to brag, and he did so in an email thread to his cousin, a man we will call Marco, to protect his identity. Marco had apparently been watching the show and expressed concern over how much money Gino was spending on Jasmine. Gino, in a moment of hubris, decided to reveal his brilliant strategy. And this email thread, which Marco would eventually leak, became the smoking gun that blew the entire case wide open. In an email dated August ND, after a particularly nasty on-screen fight about finances, Gino wrote to Marco, "The court transcripts of this exchange are chilling. Don't worry about me," Gino began. "You see what's on TV, but you don't know the whole game. I'm not sending her anywhere near what she thinks she's worth. I'm only sending her dollar, comma. It's better to make her think I'm struggling. If she thinks I'm rich, her demands will never stop. This way, she stays grateful for the little things and on a tight leash. You have to keep them a little hungry, you know? It ensures loyalty. She quit her fancy teaching job for me, so she has no other options. It's the perfect setup. I have over $1 in my retirement and savings accounts, but she thinks I'm barely scraping by. She complains, she cries, but at the end of the day, she's not going anywhere. I have all the power." Marco's reply showed a hint of moral conflict. "I don't know, man. That sounds kind of messed up. She seems to really love you. What if she finds out?" Gino's response was dripping with condescending confidence. "Find out how? She doesn't have access to my accounts. She only knows what I tell her. It's not my fault she was naive enough to give up her career. I'm just being smart. I'm protecting my assets. She gets a free ride to America and a man who loves her. All she has to do is appreciate what I give her and not ask for more. The original dollar offer was just the bait to get her to quit her job, the hook. Once she was on the line, I could reel her in however I wanted. She'll never know the difference." This email is a confession. It proves beyond any doubt that Gino's actions were not the result of financial hardship, but were part of a deliberate, premeditated scheme to defraud and control Jasmine. He didn't underpay her because he had to. He underpaid her because he wanted to. He used a false narrative of his own poverty to manipulate her, to break her spirit, and to ensure her total and complete dependence on him. The legal term for this is fraudulent inducement. He induced her to take a life-altering action, quitting her job based on a promise he had no intention of keeping. The discovery of these emails was the catalyst for everything that followed. According to our sources, Marco, Gino's cousin, wrestled with his conscience for months. He saw Jasmine's genuine distress on the show and in private conversations. He realized his cousin wasn't being smart. He was being cruel. In a moment of clarity, he anonymously forwarded the entire email chain to one of Jasmine's closest friends in Panama. The friend, horrified, immediately sent them to Jasmine. Imagine for a moment being Jasmine. Imagine reading those words, the confirmation that every fear, every doubt, every gut feeling you had was true. The man you gave up everything for, the man you were planning to marry, saw you not as a partner, but as an asset to be managed, a problem to be controlled. The humiliation, the betrayal, the violation, it must have been unbearable. The poor Gino act was revealed for what it was, a grotesque piece of theater with an audience of one, her. But Jasmine Pineda is not a woman to be trifled with. After the initial shock and devastation, her grief turned to righteous anger. She wasn't just a victim. She was a woman who had been wronged, a woman who had assigned, sealed, and delivered contract in the form of an email. She contacted a high-powered law firm specializing in contract disputes and emotional distress cases. The game was over. The lawsuit was filed. The legal proceedings began quietly, away from the prying eyes of the reality TV cameras. Gino, when served with the lawsuit, initially thought it was a joke, a desperate bluff. His lawyers advised him to settle, to make it go away. They saw the emails and knew the case was a time bomb. But Gino, in his arrogance, refused. He was convinced he could charm a judge just as he had charmed to the television audience. He believed in his own poor Gino narrative. He was about to learn a very harsh lesson about the difference between reality TV and a court of law. Jasmine's legal team built an ironclad case. They had the initial email, the offer, they had her letter of resignation, the acceptance. And now they had Gino's emails to his cousin, the proof of malicious intent, the mens rea, the guilty mind. They weren't just suing for breach of contract. They were suing for fraud, for intentional infliction of emotional distress, and for punitive damages designed to punish Gino for his malicious and calculated deception. The first part of their argument focused on the breach of contract. It was a simple matter of math. Gino promised $1 a month. For the majority of the 3 years leading up to the lawsuit, he had only provided $1 a month. That's a shortfall of $1 every single month. Over a period of, say, months, that amounts to a staggering $1 in back pay. This was the money she was contractually owed, the money she had earned by fulfilling her end of the bargain when she sacrificed her career. This was not a gift or an allowance. It was a salary for a job Gino himself had created, the job of being his partner, unencumbered by an outside career. But the case went far beyond simple accounting. The second and more explosive part of the lawsuit centered on the concept of fraudulent inducement. Jasmine's lawyers argued that the entire foundation of their modern relationship was a lie. She would have never, under any circumstances, resigned from her tenured position if she knew Gino had no intention of honoring his promise. He didn't just breach the contract, he created it under false pretenses with the specific goal of trapping her. He used his false claims of financial struggle as a tool of coercion. They brought in expert witnesses. A forensic accountant testified to Gino's true financial situation, presenting bank statements and retirement portfolios that showed his net worth was well over $500,000, directly corroborating the claims he made in the email. To his cousin. While he was crying poverty to Jasmine over a $50 dinner, he was making thousands in interest in stock dividends. A psychologist specializing in domestic abuse and coercive control testified about the devastating emotional and mental impact of financial gaslighting. She explained how Gino's actions were a classic form of abuse, designed to erode Jasmine's self-esteem and create a dynamic of learned helplessness. She argued that Jasmine's on-screen emotional volatility was a predictable trauma response to this sustained psychological manipulation. Gino's defense was weak and pathetic. He claimed the initial email was just lovers' talk, not a serious contract. He tried to argue that it was hyperbole, a romantic gesture that wasn't meant to be taken literally, but the specificity of the amount, $1, no less, undercut that argument completely. When confronted with the emails to his cousin, his legal team was thrown into disarray. He tried to claim his account was hacked. Then he tried to say he was just exaggerating to his cousin to sound like a big shot. The excuses were flimsy and transparent. The evidence was simply too overwhelming. The deposition phase was reportedly brutal for Gino. Jasmine's lawyers cross-examined him for hours, picking apart his lies one by one. They presented him with his own emails, his own bank statements, his own words. They forced him to reconcile the poor Gino persona he performed for Jasmine with the wealthy, manipulative man bragging to his cousin. A source inside the law firm described Gino as visibly crumbling under the pressure, his usual bumbling demeanor giving way to angry, flustered denials. He had spent years controlling the narrative, but in that deposition room, under oath, he had no control at all. The truth, for the first time, was not subject to his spin. As the case moved closer to a trial, the sheer weight of the evidence became undeniable. The story that was about to unfold in a public courtroom was so much more damning than anything that had ever aired on television. This was not just a squabble between a reality TV couple. This was a methodical, documented case of long-term financial and emotional abuse, masterminded by a man who had successfully cultivated a public image of being a hapless, well-meaning victim. The stage was set for a judicial smackdown of epic proportions, one that would not only cost Gino a fortune but would also shatter the carefully crafted illusion he had hidden behind for years. The world was about to see the real Gino Palazzolo, not the character he played on TV, but the man revealed in his own secret, damning words. The verdict was coming, and it was going to be a bombshell. The narrative we were sold was a lie. The roles of victim and villain were intentionally reversed. While we were judging Jasmine for her demands, she was fighting for what she was legally owed. While we were pitying Gino for his expenses, he was executing a fraudulent scheme. The court was about to set the record straight, and the financial and reputational costs for Gino would be catastrophic. The first part of this legal saga saw the lies unraveling. The second part would see justice delivered in a way no one, least of all Gino, ever saw coming. The judge's gavel was about to fall, and with it, the entire facade of their on-screen relationship. The air in the courtroom was thick, with a tension that no reality TV show could ever truly capture. This wasn't about manufactured drama for ratings. This was about real life, real betrayal, and the cold, hard letter of the law. On one side sat Jasmine Pineda, poised and resolute, her usual fiery demeanor replaced by a quiet, steely dignity. She was no longer a character on a screen. She was a plaintiff, a woman who had been systematically defrauded and was now seeking justice. On the other side sat Gino Palazzolo. He fidgeted with his tie, a faint, nervous smile plastered on his face. Our sources inside the courtroom said he still seemed to believe this was all a misunderstanding, a dramatic gesture by Jasmine that would eventually blow over. He had lived inside his own lies for so long, he had come to believe them himself. He was about to be awakened from that delusion in the most brutal way imaginable. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense man named Arthur Vance, entered the room, and a hush fell over the proceedings. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He looked down at the mountain of evidence before him, the emails, the financial statements, the psychological evaluations, and then he fixed his gaze directly on Gino. What followed was not just a reading of a verdict, it was a complete and utter dismantling of a man's character, a judicial smackdown for the ages. Mr. Palazzolo, the judge began, his voice echoing in the silent room, I have presided over many contract disputes in my years on the bench. I have seen cases of misunderstanding, of poor communication, of deals gone sour. This, however, is not one of those cases. What I have before me is one of the most clear-cut, malicious, and morally bankrupt cases of fraudulent inducement and promissory estoppel that I have ever witnessed. He picked up a copy of Gino's initial email to Jasmine. Let us begin with the principle of promissory estoppel. For the layman, this legal doctrine prevents a person from going back on a promise, even if a formal contract doesn't exist, if the other person reasonably relied on that promise to their own detriment. You, sir, wrote, if you quit your job, I will provide a monthly stipend of no less than. This was not, as your defense has feebly attempted to argue, lovers' talk. The language is specific. The condition is clear. The promise is unequivocal. He then looked at Jasmine's letter of resignation, and Ms. Pineda relied on this promise. She took an irreversible step. She surrendered a tenured career, a source of income, and her professional standing in her home country. She did this based on your word. That action, that sacrifice, was her acceptance of your offer. The moment she did that, your promise became a debt. But this case goes far beyond a simple failure to pay a debt. The judge's voice grew colder, laced with contempt. He picked up the second set of emails, the thread between Gino and his cousin. This, he said, holding the papers up for the court to see, is where this case transitions from a breach of contract into outright calculated fraud. This is the evidence of a guilty mind. You wrote, Mr. Palazzolo, it's better to make her think I'm struggling. This way she stays grateful and on a tight leash. A tight leash. That is your own word for it. You didn't underpay Ms. Pineda because you were financially strained. You did it to control her. You did it to keep her, in your own repulsive words, a little hungry to ensure loyalty. The judge leaned forward, his eyes boring into Gino. You went on to brag to your cousin that your original offer of $1 was, and I quote, just the bait to get her to quit her job, the hook. You admitted in writing that you created this agreement with no intention of ever honoring it. This is the very definition of fraudulent inducement. You convinced a woman to abandon her career, to place her entire financial well-being in your hands, not for her benefit, not for your mutual future, but for your own selfish convenience. You wanted a companion available at your beck and call, and you were willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate to get it. You then compounded this fraud with a campaign of psychological abuse. You deliberately misrepresented your financial situation to make her feel guilty and demanding for asking for what you legally owed her. You subjected her to years of what is commonly known as financial gaslighting, making her question her own worth and her perception of reality. Every time you called her a gold digger, it was not a reaction. It was a tactic, a cruel and effective tool to maintain your deception and your control. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. Gino's face had drained of all color. The nervous smile was gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure shock. This wasn't going the way he had planned. Therefore, the judge continued, his voice booming with finality, this court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Jasmine Pineda, on all counts. We will now move to the matter of damages. This is not simply about repayment, this is about making the plaintiff whole and punishing the defendant for his malicious conduct. He then laid out the financial judgment, a devastating blow-by-blow breakdown of Gino's fraud.